Up to record.
There we go.
I am going to see if I can share slides today. Let's see what we got going. Okay. Can y'all see that? Is that coming
Yes.
through? Excellent. Super. Okay, great. Well, I have just a few slides here this morning. Mostly, I'm really interested in the dialogue with you all about these ideas, and so I just invite you as we go along. Put your questions, comments in the chat, and I will, try to grab them. And if any of you see something that's super relevant to what I'm currently saying, please call that out for me. And then I'm also going to have time, for us to dialogue and Q&A with each other towards the end. My hope here today is to give you a little bit of a sense of, my journey to this topic. And my hope is to give you an overview of the Self-Governance Commons. It's quite a new, endeavor. So yes, plenty of growth to come for it, hopefully. But just as a way to introduce myself a little, I am Cecile Green. I am with Round Sky Solutions. We are a worker co-op that teaches collaborative leadership through a certification program online, and was really informed by this body of work that I began back in the 2010, 2011, really as I traced the journey. It started when I was a kid, but I won't go back quite that far. And the main curiosity for me was just sort of observing all of these mission-driven organizations. So I've been a social entrepreneur since I was in my early 20s. I've been a part of too many different startups and efforts to even count them all. And but I was repeatedly struck by the reality that I encountered, anyways, that you could see these organizations and efforts filled with very well-intentioned people with amazing missions and visions for what they're doing, and yet the operating conditions inside those efforts would reliably become toxic to greater or lesser degrees. And that really puzzled me. And it took me some time to realize that I had an assumption that one could put good people together with good intentions and reliably get a good organization. And that was not the case. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it didn't. And therefore there was a delta there. There's a gap, like what worked when it was working, and what went off the rails when it wasn't. And ultimately I put together this hypothesis that at the center of all of our crises out there, all of our many crises, like if there is things in the center in the Venn diagram then where they all overlap, one of them, and perhaps the most important one, is the misuse of power. And I have followed that hypothesis down into a bunch of research into this question of what is power? How do we work well together? I'm going to have to move this banner here because it looks like it's interfering with the, there we go. Happily open it back up again. Let's do that. Let's try that. Okay. So I was very curious about this issue of power and what is it? How does it work when it's healthy, and what happens when it's not? And needed to really come to a overarching definition of power that could give me some foundations upon which to investigate those differences. And Paul Tillich's orientation to power is something that is very, very fundamental to everything about life. Felt like it provides the most overarching definition, so that we don't get sidetracked into ideas that power is only bad. That was one of the troubles I encountered in my journey, is that folks think of power itself as being bad. And that's completely understandable given our, given our history, where power has been abused so reliably that we have come to associate it with being only toxic, right? And but reclaiming the generative forms of power, I believe, gives us a much better footing upon which to transform toxic power dynamics than the opposite, which is just to claim that all power is harmful. And so within this overarching understanding of power, one of the journeys that I took was understanding, where does power show up in our interactions? And I developed something called the Power Matrix, which we don't have time to really get into today. But if you're curious about it, I'm happy to share more. I have a published academic article on it, and it helps us sort of locate power in our day-to-day interactions with each other. But the gist of it is that communication is one place where power flows, and we can reliably sort of get in and surgically operate on power flows, and surgically work, or very deliberately, to use maybe a better word, very deliberately work to create healthy generative power exchange yeah, as we do work together. And within that, there was this essentially this lens on communication, which was very revealing, and also, again, very fundamental. So looking at these basic constructs to help us understand, how do we approach this dilemma that we have as a species. And so all communication, has a what and a how, and then when you combine those two, it creates some outputs. So very simply, the what is you know, the spreadsheets, what our agreements are with each other, our projects, all that. That's the what, and the how is then the process by which we get there. So you all are fairly savvy, I'm guessing, and in terms of, this question of generative process. And so, for example, a decision-making process is a good example of a process that's been deliberately constructed to enable us to have constructive metabolizing of the content, the what, into clear outputs that move us forward incrementally. So this lens really highlighted one interesting fact. Well, I believe it's a fact. Each of you can corroborate or deny this, but that many organizations, not all, many organizations, hyper focus on the content and the outputs and skip process. They skip or overlook it, or sometimes even deride it, and consider it a waste of time. I've been in interactions where that was the case. And interestingly, however, you can never have any communication that doesn't have a process. And so the impact of sort of denying it, or closeting it, or hiding it, or not looking at it at all, is that you end up with process which has inherited all the traits of the dysfunctional use of power that we've had in our history. And so the great value of making our process explicit is it means that we can construct collaborative, fair, equitable communication practices that get us to clear outputs, that incrementally move our work forward together. So within this sort of understanding of communication, one of the places I went was into asking this question, well, what are we communicating about? And this is a hypothesis I have. The attempt is to try to be comprehensive and also minimally sufficient. What are we talking about? What are we sharing power about when we work together? And the purpose of this is that if we have the content that we're talking about, now we can construct clear process for each of these unique conversations that enable us to get to generative outputs, and keep moving forward. So, a couple things fall out of seeing these 7 conversations. One is that often these conversations are conflated with each other. So a common one is that we see, problems coming up in the interpersonal, our relationships with each other, but actually those tensions, those problems have roots in perhaps our governance, perhaps our agreements around who does what are unclear, or perhaps, old and we need to update them, or perhaps our strategy is also implicit and we both think we're heading in different directions. So of course we're going to conflict. So the value of this is that it helps us diagnose the source of the tension and then to metabolize it using clear collaborative process. And one of the ways in which these 7 conversations emerged or became visible was through a survey of the field of literature out there on organizational management and personal individual development. And in that process, I realized that what we really need is some kind of synoptic integration of all of this work. And so, what is synoptic integration? It's a big word, I like it, but what does it mean? As you can see, a nice definition up there on the screen. And I'll also offer a metaphor, an analogy for us to sit with here. So, imagine that you were trying to canoe across a pond, a lake, a river, whatever it is, and all you had were the paddles and the seats of your canoe. All you have are the paddles and the seats. How far do you think you'd get across the lake? Not very far, right? And you'd probably be really frustrated by, oh, this paddle is supposed to work, it's not working. This seat's supposed to work, it's not working. It's because we're lacking that sufficient integration of the various disparate components that have to come together to enable us to reliably cooperate, to reliably collaborate over time and share power in a generative manner. And so just to give you an example of some of the bodies of work that we have attempted to integrate into this particular version, again, this has been my work that's led me to this particular integration. Of course, hopefully you recognize that one. And this is not a comprehensive list, but it will give you a sense of the sort of ways in which we're pulling from a wide range of types of inputs and types of focus to really look at how do we do this sharing of power, this getting to reliably pro-social behavior in our organizations. And this body of work really, would, over the last 10, 12 years, we have been able to teach it. We have a certification program, and part of that really inspired me to stand back and look and say, okay, it is possible for us to get to a synoptic integration of how to share power well together. However, whatever this is really a human knowledge commons, like the how that we do that and all of the contributions that go into it, including how we measure it, are a vital human knowledge commons and should not belong to any single organization, say myself or any other organization out there or individual. This really needs to be cultivated as a commons, and hence the idea behind the self-governance commons is to bring together all of the bodies of work out there, because I have met so many amazing people, and like Michelle Smith is one of those folks, doing this work, right? We're not alone. Round Sky Solutions isn't alone. Circle Forward isn't alone. There are dozens, if not hundreds, of efforts out there trying to solve for this question of how do we do self-governance better. And that it's highlighted by the fact that we have dozens of different terms for this territory. Right? Self-governance, self-organization, participatory, democratic, like there's just a gazillion ways of talking about this territory, which is essentially, in my estimation, the same. How do we lead and govern ourselves as opposed to what we've experienced for millennia, which is a whole lot of top-down management, leadership, basically autocratic power. So that was the genesis of this idea, and I've spent the last many months talking to people. I also I'm in the process of writing my next article, which is in publication at the moment, which outlines a method for sorting all of this input and understanding how we would integrate it into, a set of a synoptic integration of clear practices, clear ways of measuring. And this inquiry cycle really outlines at its basic, it is the scientific process in action, but rendered into a more general framework. So that we can take any domain and really look at what our theories are. How do we think about this? Like, what are the things that we're, trying to assert are true about this particular domain? And then we can also look at, well, how are we going about testing those theories, and what are we measuring in the metrics, and how are we then interpreting that data, and then how are we updating our theories? So each of these stations are essential, and we can't do without them if we are to unpack a given domain and hope to render it more let's see, more beneficial, more healthy, something like that. So part of the way of doing this that we're working with right now is to develop a symposia process. This would be something that is somewhat ongoing, at least till we reach a certain level of articulation of what these sets of these practices are. And the symposia process as it stands right now begins with a phase of inquiry, which is open-ended, right? We aren't trying to, in the inquiry part of the practice, we're not trying to come to answers. We're trying to unpack further what are the questions we have together. Phase 2 would be the more typical symposium experience, which is there's some person, some individual, some group who's done a bunch of thought work about this and has something to present to us that relates to the inquiries that we're going through. And then third would be to bring specific proposals for the standards to the gathering and to pass those using a clear decision-making process. And then continue this until we have reached a point of stability at which, honestly, it might be never. My hope is that this is essentially ongoing, because as we put this work into action and research and test it, I'm expecting that we will continually find ways to improve it and to add to it. And so we shall see. But this process, I'm hoping, will be, open to anybody who cares about this question of how do we govern ourselves? How do we do this in a way that's healthy and reliable, and accounts for many of the failure modes that we've experienced so far? So for more information, please feel free, check those links out. I will try dropping one in the self-governance comments into the chat in a moment. But I just want to see, I think that is my last slide for the moment. And there's a ton more to say about this, and there's more slides I can share, but I just want to pause the fire hose of talking and see how this is landing for you guys, and what you might want to double down on, or go further into. And yes.
Okay, I'll get myself in the stack. And ask, and then I see Gilles. And ask you to go back to the circles. Oh, I just wanted to spend a little time with that slide, and that's all I have. And Gilles, if you would, your floor is yours.
So was that one of the first ones that I shared?
Yes.
It was. So it's the
Sure.
sort of overlapping one, or was it the inquiry cycle?
I think it was the inquiry cycle.
Okay, great. Awesome, thanks. Too many slides with circles.
Right. You can put it up.
All right. My Zoom share isn't behaving properly, so let me hope this does. Can you guys see my screen now again?
Yeah.
With the image?
Thanks. Now, we don't have to keep it there if it's distracting to anybody. Go ahead, Gilles.
Cecile, this is great, and great in two senses. One in the sense of terrific, and one in the sense of grateful. I really appreciate what you've pulled together here and the way that you're laying it out, and lots of stuff provoked. Will you be able to share these slides with us?
Happily, yes.
That would be great. So a couple of thoughts. I really appreciate you bringing forth power. way that you're doing it. I've had the same observation as you. There's an aversion to power among the folks in the universe that we all share, but power fundamentally, if you go to physics, is just the ability to do work,
Right.
the capacity to get stuff done. And some of the folks on the call know you don't, that I've been hosting a monthly webinar for the last 5 years called Living Between Worlds, subtitled with grace, dignity, and power. So we're like wading into that question all the time. We're meeting today at
Nice.
noon Pacific. You'd be most welcome to join us if you're available.
Wow.
So that's one thing of how do we not reject the fundamental notion and value of power because of the way power has been misused in the world.
Yeah.
I will quibble with you. We've been subject to autocratic power for millennia, yes, but we've been living in self-governance power for tens of millennia. And both of those exist now. And so we have that experience in human experience, and the dawn of everything, which I'm sure you know, is a wonderful exploration of that.
Yeah.
Two couple of pokes, not to be aggressive, but maybe stimulate something. On the content process dilemma, I have found many organizations not so much mired in content to the exclusion of process, but mired in process. And I find that particularly among organizations that value self-governance. And so I think there's a big challenge there. Second, the phases, your 3 phases of, I forget what the title was on that. It struck me that between presenting and deciding, there's a phase called reflecting and discussing, and other stuff that happens. Maybe that's in the process of deciding in your scheme, but I wanted to highlight that. Third, the 7 kinds of work conversations that you presented struck me as contextual, not the actual flow of conversations among human beings. And the flow of conversations is more summarized by Charles Austin's performative verbs or Searle's performative verbs, I guess, of request, promise, assert, brain freeze. Assess, requests, promises, assertions, assessments, and declarations, which is what happens when human beings talk to each other. The stuff laid out is what we're talking about. How we talk is there, and that's where the life of an organization, in my experience, actually shows up. Is how we do those things. And thank you for letting me go so long. I just want to say, by way of context, this is not an abstract interest for me. I've been working on building a cooperative holding company with a vision of something like Mondragon in America.
Nice.
So very live questions of how this happens in organizations on the ground, and how we bring this kind of capacity to organizations that may not have been orienting this way. So thank you so much. Eager to be in more communication and see your slides. And I just want to say, because I forgot, Andrew, nice to actually see your face in our time zone.
That's wonderful, Gilles. Thank you so much. Really appreciate all those comments and constructive criticisms. And I'd love to dig in a little bit further to some of them. And I also want to leave room for other folks here on the call to have a chance to respond, ask questions. So I've made a couple notes. Maybe I'll circle back to my comments after hearing from a couple other folks.
Yeah, and if there's time after people talk, I think that's the priority for the rest of our time together. But if there's time afterwards, I'd love to have you unpack this inquiry cycle diagram.
Okay, great. And I'm curious, does it make sense for me to leave this up for now, still for now, or should we
fine with me either way.
Circle back to the full screen on videos?
I think, Michelle,
Zoom has now done a tweak. If you look at the top of your screen, you can toggle between the full the meeting screen and the presentation screen.
Oh, interesting. One can personally do that.
That's brand new.
Wow, very exciting. Okay, great. I will let you guys toggle to your heart's content.
I think, Gilles, were you just asking about unpacking this inquiry cycle, this slide that's up? And I think, Michelle,
I was asking about that. We don't need to do that now, but I'd love to have time.
Well, I was just going to say, Michelle, I think you were asking about that, and I had a question about that. Actually, I think that would be valuable because I'm not sure. Yeah.
But quickly, before we go there, I see Nikki's hand up. But yeah, I would love that too. So go ahead, Nikki.
Yeah, I have to take off to a different meeting now, but I wanted to thank Cecile. Like, I really love what you're doing. I can't wait to get to know you better and understand what you're up to and see, if there's room for collaboration, because I'm extremely interested in the conversations of power and how we shift power to more nurturing leadership as opposed to the the Roman circus we have now. So anyhow, thank you all so much. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Nikki. It's great to meet you.
You too.
I see a question from, so yes, if you would unpack this inquiry circle a little bit for me, because I don't quite understand it, but I, haven't spent time with it yet, but I don't quite understand it. And then I do see a question from Lynn to have you speak a little bit to the over-processed tilt in some organizations, and especially these types of communities.
Yes. Okay, great.
And over-process may be an evaluative, depending on how much process you like, or can tolerate. But I think there certainly is a such thing as process that creates anxiety, drain, and not decision making. If I may, Lynn, if you want to talk more about what you mean, but first, still in the inquiry circle.
Okay, great. Actually, I think I want to make one little point about that over process, and then we can circle back to it if it's still alive. Absolutely. I tend to mention more the other, that folks tend to focus heavily on the content. But the opposite is also true. Folks get too overbalanced in the process. And so what I found is that having a clear set of processes that are efficient, and that doesn't mean, sometimes efficiency is abused, right? So I don't, there's conversations to have about that, but processes that are efficient so that we are not getting into the drain, right? So for example, one of the things that we use in our meeting practices is that we have a attention-driven meeting practice. So every agenda item is considered attention, and there's one tension holder for that, and we know it's moved forward when it incrementally, not perfectly, for today, incrementally moves that tension forward for that tension holder, not for everybody else, right? And now they might move tensions forward for them, but it's one of the places, and then we move on to the next tension, and we don't like bounce around between different tensions unless that's absolutely necessary, and that requires some special facilitation. But there are ways to actually get us out of the lugubriousness of over process, which is just as much a problem as the hyper focus on content. So yes, I'd say that is a value that we have paid attention to in the design and stewardship of this ecology of practices, and I intend to carry that forward. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Cecile. And I'm just wondering if you can just say a little bit more about tension holder and what is a tension? Just an example would be great. I mean, it sounds like a technique or a method. So
it is. It's very, very powerful. It's incredibly helpful, and just because I know our time is short today, and we have, and there's more to explore about this. We're actually running a webinar on September 5th. It's free, that we will get into much greater detail on the tension processing part. So if you want to come to that, I recommend that as a good place. But yes, the term is tension. And it is related to attention in the sense that what we are asking is for each one of us as participants in a body of work to become tension holders, or to pay attention to, and this is a somatic experience, it's not just a mental one. So there's a beautiful move that we're making into our bodies to pay attention for what's up for us with respect to this team, with respect to the work we're doing. And those then are surfaced or put on the agenda as agenda items. That becomes the framing through which we actually meet and converse and share power. And then as we have And yes, I believe sociocracy did, and certainly holacracy built on the idea of tension processing as well. And so both of those bodies of work have that as central to how they think about, essentially the meeting process. And then, yes, there's so much more to say, because then once you have that tension in the tension holder, then there's a question of how do you process that tension? And usually there's a sorting of what type of tension it is that enables us to pick a process that's appropriate to it. Awesome.
Thank
Oh,
you.
Thank you, David. I appreciate your dropping the link in there. It's very helpful. All right. Yay. So Michelle and others who wanted me to get more into, I think it was also Tracy, more into this, the inquiry cycle. Are there, I guess I'll say a little bit more, but then I would like questions, because that might help me sort of get into corners that I'm too close to. So, but yeah, I think besides the 4 stations that I articulated, the other major dimension to this is kind of 3-dimensional, and it pertains to this difference between what is concrete and what is abstract. So at the center, we have experience, and we have the most direct contact with concreteness possible. And that is an incredibly important and vital arena that often gets forgotten as we ascend into the more abstract, right? And so essentially the circle expands outward. So in the middle is the domain. So this is the topic that we're going to unpack together, whatever it is. And then experience is in the center, and it is represented by as you'll see the arrows on the right, theoretical constructs. And this pertains to all 4 stations. So each of the 4 stations goes through an understanding of what are the most, so theory is basically a set of ideas about what appears to be true in life. Right. So as we're looking at experience and we're saying, oh, these are some of the patterns we see. This appears to be true. Right. And then typically we go out and we test it and we measure it and we interpret the data we get, and we come back and we are like, well, did that match up? Does that mean we have to change our theories? The next ring out is meta theory. So meta theory, what it does is it takes multiple theories and it looks across the theories for whatever comes out of that. It could be it could be a meta theory, or it could be a meta praxis, or it could be metametrics, etc. And then the next ring out are the arch theoretical constructs, which are constructed across meta theoretical understanding. So we look across those meta theories to see what do they have in common, what are they pointing to. And I'm realizing I have another slide that has this populated with examples, which I think I might pull up to show you guys, because I think it would help with this articulation here. But before I do that, the outermost yellow ring refers to arches, which are essentially foundational aspects of how our universe functions. So these are things like fractality, recursion, and integrative levels. So there's things like this that show up across every domain. They're foundational to everything. And the arches themselves help us understand when we've found arch theoretical constructs. So maybe I will, if you'll give me a moment, I'm going to go and pull up that other image, and hopefully that will help us all here. Oh, hang on 1 second. Gray cycle. Okay, let me go back to sharing.
I just want you to know, Andrew, that we see you, and we're going to recognize you in just a minute.
All right. So I think I'll pause here and let you guys look at this, and then any questions you have that would help get deeper in would be useful. All right. Andrew, you've got your hand up. You want to take it away?
Hi, Cecile. Thank you.
Hmm.
Nice to meet you. So I'm not sure I'm on the quite the same track. So like my question is kind of simple. I'm just trying to understand like what's the unit of analysis? Are we talking about organizations? Is that the unit? Or is it, yeah, like I'm just trying to situate us in terms of
Yeah.
where governance is, like, and how you're seeing it,
Mm-hmm.
and in relation to whatever other levels or, yeah.
Cool. And feel free to clarify what you mean by unit of analysis, Andrew, but
Sure.
I believe you're talking about this. What are we even talking about here? And so in this particular slide and in this conversation, I am talking about governance and particularly self-governance, but to define governance is actually a really important first step of the self-governance comments because people use that term differently all the time. In my particular use of this term, I have two different definitions, which I use. And I don't like that because it adds to confusion, right? But it's also kind of what I see happening out there. The one definition is that the governance is sort of the set of practices that we use to coordinate humans and resources towards a goal, right? So it's about the larger coordination of people and resources. The second, and I call that big G governance. Second, I call little g governance, and I consider that one of the 7 conversations. You probably remember that from the slide I had up. And as such, it is a very specific conversation around who has the power to do what, when, and where. And that includes things like roles, accountabilities, policies, protocols, all of the sort of shared patterns around how we're going to share power together. How are we doing, Andrew? Did that answer your question? Does that bring more up?
Yeah. So, okay. When I think of it, like, I think, okay, this could apply to me as a human.
Mm-hmm.
I could just apply this to myself in my daily life, actually, right?
Yes.
Or I could be part of an organization,
Mm-hmm.
and then I would start thinking about like what's the role of that organization in the world and so on. And or I could think I was part of a network, and how would I apply this as a network? Or how would I apply this as a transboundary network, like a global network? So this is kind of what I'm getting at, like, and I think my sense, my personal sense is that it's pretty interesting at the organizational and the network level. Well, I mean, it could be interesting at any level, but I start to run into challenges when I get into like the transboundary international governance, all that space. I start to get into it feels more difficult to me. So yeah, I'm sort of trying to figure that out. I'll give you an example. Like you can go to extremes. I won't do the international, but I mean, if you're running a ship has a captain, right? And everybody knows that, and everyone sort of goes along with that, unless the captain does a really bad job, in which case there's a mutiny, right? So all these things are taking place in the background, but like the working assumption is that it's going like this.
Mm-hmm.
And for the most part, I think it works. Like, and it's getting from point A to point B. If we want to get from where we are to someplace we haven't even imagined, I think that's a different task.
Mm.
And this feels much more adapted to that kind of task to me. So I don't know if that makes sense. I'm just giving you my own reflection, but
Yeah, thank
I'd be
you,
curious
Andrew.
to hear what you think.
Yeah. Well, yeah, first of all, I feel like this is a topic that could take several hours worth of open-ended inquiry around, and it would be lovely. And so obviously in the short time we have left this morning, I guess I will simply say that I see not only this inquiry cycle, but also the ecology of practices for healthy power sharing as scale free, meaning they can apply at any scale. As you were saying, they can apply it to myself, my internal family system of me. They can apply it to my family. They can apply to an organization. They can apply to a ship. They could apply to global governance. Because it's scale free, in that sense, it's fractal, and therefore the same patterns appear to be showing up in any scale that this this conversation emerges. Sweet. Anyone else? Questions, comments? Feel free to jump in.
You can stop sharing now if you want. I can't wait to have, I'm so glad you're willing to share those slides though, because I want to, as I listen, I want to go through and see them again. I see Lynn and then Brad.
Cecile, this is fabulous. So thank you. Can you comment, because I work with established organizations, do you see a pathway in your work for more established organizations with that structure to migrate, and any thoughts or experience around that?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, the vast majority of our students are in established organizations. And the pathway through is actually, I mean, what we recommend is, and we haven't gotten a chance to get into the details of the ecology of practice that we have assembled at Round Sky, but there's a very simple way in, which is through your meeting practice. Your meeting practice becomes a dojo in which you are using these new orientation skills. And often teams have some aspects of their meeting practices that they're already doing parts of this. So it's just a little bit of some tweaks that they're making to make these adjustments, like to integrate the tension surfacing, tension-driven agenda process. And so there are various aspects to this sort of ecology of practices that folks get introduced to, and then go and introduce them to their team. So meeting practices are a great place to start. And then because the magic of the tension-driven process is that it helps us, we don't have to strategically think through how are we going to change this organization ahead of time. We simply listen to the tensions as they're coming up. And it's at the pace that the organization can shift, and it's directly to what's up for people. And it's really very powerful in that regard. And people feel very much like they're owning the change process and through that sort of approach.
Thank you. There's a little bit of shades of Dave Snowden, where he talks about just sort of make the change that's possible and go from there.
Yes.
Next step. So thank you.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'll pop in to say, to me, that matches with permaculture. That sounds like a very regenerative process that matches how healthy ecosystems adapt and respond. It's like, it makes sense. So go ahead, Brad.
Yeah, great, Cecile. I just wanted to chime in regarding the whole fractal thing. You and I and Charles Blass talked a while back about what we're working on in terms of manifesting the Regen community as kind of a network cooperative, if you will.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to share briefly a couple of images, because I think that I don't know if you guys can see this, it's probably pretty messy, but this is the way we're thinking about how overlapping communities might federate. So this here is bioregional. So you have like the Andes and Amazonia, and then you have a headwaters community that is maybe where they overlap, but the estuary community is within Amazonia, et cetera, and you can, and indigenous communities, et cetera. And then this is sort of the larger vision of, okay, what is, we have bioregional, we have the climate movement, we have, you know, the sort of decentralized web movement and all the sort of adjacent allies. And so, and the other key point of you know, what I've been working on is the nature, the unique nature of networks in their ability to do coordination in ways that flat collections of people can't. So I just wanted to kind of reiterate that as a path forward, actually, for getting better at new forms of coordination and doing it at scale.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thanks, Brad. Thanks, Brad. That's great. There's something about what you just said, Brad, that reminded me of a point that somebody else was making. I apologize. Maybe it was Gilles. That this work is new and old at the same time. And so I think Andrew was mentioning the example of a ship and a captain, and how, you know, everybody knows there's a captain and you just follow their orders, and that's true. But there's a whole body of self-governance from the Pirates of the Caribbean. And this stuff has popped up throughout the eons. You know, and what we're looking for in the self-governance commons is, where do we converge? Because there are things that converge across all these bodies of work, which is so exciting. And then, of course, there's going to be places of divergence, which are equally important. And that's part of what we'll be, you know, reflecting on, discussing, and digesting as part of the you know, coming to this body of work around self-governance.
Yeah.
The Pirates Code. I love that. Yeah, exactly. It was the Pirates Code. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think one of the areas of real innovation that could move things forward quickly would be to solve how you allow these kind of nested and federated communities / networks, let them decide how they want, what tools they want to use for doing the kind of decision making and governance, but to do it in a way that has some consistency. Like Gil, you're talking about a cooperative holding company, right? What if every one of those nested circles was its own sort of network cooperative that has its own governance, and then, but you know, but maybe a federation of them would want to use sociocracy to do things, whereas any one of the individuals might want to use something else. And so what can we do in order to make it easy for that kind of local tool decisions to be natural, and you know, patterns and best practices, and you know, learning from each other.
Brad, that's one of the central questions that I feel like the Self-Governance Commons was created to help with. And this is so very curious to hear how this lands for you guys. This question of plurality of governance choices is really critical in my mind. It's important that whatever essential, I'm thinking of these as templates that we consent on collectively, are that they are templates that we recommend every team try, use, and then modify if you need to. And which is, you know, and that's the process that we're hoping can remain somewhat consistent, so that it's easier across organizations, across networks, to actually coordinate. But then the content, the output of those process conversations is going to be unique for each team. So who does what in each team, what your protocols are, that is all going to be unique at the level of expression, is kind of how I'm seeing it. But that the templates for how we do that are consistent, and that will hopefully enable us to coordinate across these diverse spaces. Got some hands up, David, and then Dennis.
Yeah, thanks. So I love these conversations. And I'm afraid I'm going to dig myself in too deep and not be able to get myself back out again. But I've been trying to figure out, so a lot of my interest is around kind of open source systems, how we co-invest in assets that are valuable, but shared by the commons, and you want them to get better. That one of the things that I've realized is that if they don't get better, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So I've ended up falling back. I mean, to me, the contrast is kind of like we talk about governance and then we talk about the market as if they're different. And the market is a way that we get distributed things done. It gives us stuff that we want without having to coordinate. We don't have to necessarily tell anybody to do anything. I just offer the money, they give me what I want. And so, when we talk about governance in an organizational structure, we tend to imply authority and boxes and people coordinating and stuff like that. So anyway, one of the things I've wondered about is it seems to me that there is implicit a reciprocity in both of these things. And that if you could get in the open source space, people participate because they benefit in some way. It may not be a directly transactional benefit. But they're contributing and they're benefiting, and it makes sense, and the system goes. And the question to me has been, how do we break out reciprocity into more ways, kind of, so that it becomes a little bit more of a finer grained tool. I'm just kind of curious if that resonates at all, and how you think about reciprocity and where it falls into governance systems for you.
Oh, it's beautiful, David. And again, another several-hour conversation. And I would just say, absolutely. I think you have put a point on something that is a central value behind having healthy systems for self-governance. So I keep using that term healthy because I often see attempts at self-governance, which are replications of our existing ways of using power, right? And so one of the things that happens with asymmetries of power in our current ways of using power is that it tends to be not as reciprocal as it could be or should be for it to be healthy. Right. And so it's about creating these practices, in my mind, which enable that reciprocity of power, right? So we have power sharing going on, as opposed to, again, what we typically have in our current setup. Yeah, lots more to say, but I'd love to give Dennis a moment, and then, yeah. And it's great to meet you, Gilles. Go ahead, Dennis.
Yeah, there we go. How about that? Okay,
Excellent.
Great. You started out talking about how these really well-intentioned, purpose-based organizations end up becoming dysfunctional reliably. And I've seen that too in my organizational consulting. The fact that we're taking individuals who are just themselves, who have a variety of backgrounds and a variety of trauma that they carry forward into the social group, that tends to inevitably take over. Even in my work, I go like, wow, I am not the person I want to be often because of some stuff going on, the shadow or whatever is going on, the inner psychotic or whatever comes out at inopportune times. And I get driven or triggered. And that I think is an important aspect that people need to want to collaborate. They need to want to have reciprocity. Sociopathic, not going to be reciprocal unless it's to their own benefit, right? Narcissists the same way. So I'd like to see some Venn diagrams, including the inner process, the spiritual transformation that enables us to be of service to others and have that stance rather than the one of like control the world to feed me.
Oh my gosh, that's so important, Dennis. And we're attempting to account for that through the interpersonal and personal conversations, and having those integrated into the 7 conversations that are always happening in an organization. But the truth is that it's a major hole in our thinking about what it takes to actually self-govern well. And so a lot more work is needed to really put that forward and to have it be an effective part of our work together in a way that's supportive, but doesn't also derail the work that an organization is doing, right? It's a really tricky balance, but yeah.
I'm going to notice the time, and I've got to go because I want to go to another thing and build on that with just some twinkle fingers to say, we definitely are recognizing at Circle Forward that it's going to be important for, particularly if an organization is going through a change of adopting more self-governance. We're just recognizing that like there needs to be a resource in place when people's stuff comes up, because even if you want to collaborate, your stuff is going to come up. If you're not, that's because we're trained, brain trained, behavior trained to empire. And we're trying to brain train and behavior train to ecological civilization. You can name those however you want to. Those are my favorites. But it's it's not, we don't recognize how our reactions are going to be when, our control, our fears, our needs, our things are triggered. So our traumas, or just our privileges, like whatever, right? Any of that. So I love that, I think a lot of times with organizational change, we don't want to talk about it because leaders don't want to think about it. Somehow having some advice for people to have some of that in place, and at least one ally in there to be like, okay, listen, just on the side, we need to, until it becomes clear, right?
Yeah.
And it becomes safe. Thank you, Cecile. I would love to have you come back as this gets developed. I'm sure there are pieces of this that would be so valuable here. We would love to provide value for you. So I'm glad I did see you're in the GRC directory. If you need any help engaging in the Slack, get in touch with David.
All right. Thank you, David.
And please
Thank
come
you,
back.
everyone.
Thank you.
Well, and Cecile, please think of GRC as a place where you can test things, I think. I mean, I
Yes.
think we would enjoy the conversation. So if you want to workshop something, or, if you use
Thank
us
you.
as your test bed.
As my guinea pigs. Awesome.
Exactly. That's
Exactly.
Really
Yeah,
well.
that was the goal.
I
All
will
right.
totally take you up on that.
Great.
All right, you guys.
Yeah.
Take
care.
care.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Hey,
Do you
Brad,
wanna
do you
stay
want
on?
to talk?
Yeah.
Do you have a few minutes, or
Yeah, that was my intent. So
I'm gonna just hold on here. Let's see. Stop the video. Move Gil. And we got Michelle back even. It's all come together.
okay.
That was great, Michelle. Thanks.
Isn't that just the coolest thing that you didn't even know was happening, and you didn't even really exactly know we needed, but we so totally need, and is happening. And I just want to support it, and I want Circle Forward listed amongst there, and at some point, the work that we develop through this work, to also come alive. I'm going to put us on my phone because I'm hungry and I need some food.
Okay. Good deal. Quick aside before we get into the pose thing. Actually, Michelle, before you do that, if you want to just take let me just show you do 1 minute screen share. I wanted to update you guys on the network co-op import thing, because I've been learning a lot from people's experience, and so yeah, do you mind if I do 2 minutes on that? Okay. So what I found was, so if we go to that that URL, you remember, so this is the import process, and we've got now nine members who've gone through the process. I went through it with Nikki the other day, and there's definitely some hiccups there. So I backed off and said, okay, we can do that, but what are our other opportunities? And I realized that a much easier thing to do would be to, I've differentiated the existing database and calling it a simulation, right? And then the network co-op one is a brand new database that is completely opt-in by people, agreeing to share their connections. But what I realized was we could do this as by solving the portable community, by approaching it as portable communities and using the existing simulation data to let people opt into that. Okay, So just briefly, what I've done is we already have a bunch of communities here that I've been, just doing as demos, like the one for Global Regen Collab. I started from the couple hundred full names that Carolina gave me almost 2 years ago. And then I went to the Airtable from the members directory and got that data. And it was, and so that's what we're seeing here is this is better data than I did on the original one. But here's what's cool. The idea is that I can see the coloring here. So the coloring is the pink ones are the ones that I'm directly connected to. So I get to see them, right? The green ones are the ones that someone has shared with the group. And the yellow ones are the ones that someone has shared with the whole thing. So, and then the idea is that anyone who comes along here and is in this group, so let's say Dave Witzel comes along, he would see something different. His pinks would be different, but he could say, I'm going to add my connections. And so in the case of adding my connections, the pink ones are ones that no one else could see except me. And so, but when I do that add connections, they become visible to everybody else. And so, anyway, so the idea is to kind of invite GRC to come in here and inspect it, add their connection, just agree to do it at the group level. So they're just saying, okay, you have connections for me, and these are the pink ones here, and the pink ones here are my connections within that group. I'm gonna, basically opt in to letting other people in the group see it, and then I can turn it on and off. So I can say, on off basically. And so anyway, that's just kind of what I'm doing. So the threshold for the GRC membership is much lower. They don't have to do they don't have to export anything. They don't have to go through. I mean, the one thing that we'll have to do would be to claim their LinkedIn account, because the adding of connections doesn't make sense unless we know what their LinkedIn account is. So anyway, that's where I'm going with it. I think any of these other communities, I'm going to go to right away after we've tested it out, but I think it could be really interesting and really much less friction. Anyway, that's just a quick update. I think I'll be ready for it, in a few more days, so we can talk about whether we want to try and experiment. Well, first we'll experiment with you guys and a few others.
Thank you.
So on to pose. Oh, and by the way, this approach is really good for events. That's been one of the other outcomes of DWeb and the testing, is that gathering of tribes, which Nikki's working on, and then several others that are popping up. They're classic communities that could benefit from being able to use this portable communities approach. So Dave, have you had chance to do anything with the doc since we talked yesterday?
I've done a little bit. I've been mostly kind of playing with ChatGPT to see if I can get, kind of arguments together.
That's good.
I don't know. So I guess I'm trying to, and Michelle, how are you? Maybe we should make sure, how are you on this stuff? Do you want to do a catch-up review before we get in too deep?
I have read it. I have read through it, the executive summary.
Dave and I changed it a lot yesterday, by the way.
Okay, then I haven't seen anything that's the most recent. So, but we can look at that. We can do that first. Just give me 1 second to
Probably a good idea.
Yeah, to redo it. I really, I guess, I know I saw that you answered the question. I feel a little bit, and I'm kind of used to this, is sometimes I feel like I ask dumb questions, it's like, these are dumb questions, but I'm kind of dumb. Like, about open source and the technology piece. So, I mean, I'm just vague on meanings in some cases. So, yeah, I just kind of go ahead and ask the questions of how this fits in and so, but
yeah, those are legitimate questions. Dave and I ended on our conversation yesterday on how does open source fit into this. The quick answer, overview wise, I think that first of all, Dave and you, whoever put the executive summary together, I think the languaging in there is quite good from my perspective, and then I've been working on kind of make a clear description of the ecosystem of what proof of humanity, portable communities, network cooperative, and the people marking, what I've been calling who knows, but basically respect networks. How those four things all kind of fit together in the sense that they all need each other. And I think they resonate, they make good componentry in potentially in this document. Or in the grant proposal. Dave asked, and we actually have working code on almost all of it. So Dave was asking how much of it is open source, and the answer is basically none yet in terms of our code. We're built on open source code like ArangoDB. All the infrastructure is open source. So we can make good claims to that. And the intent of the stuff that I'm stewarding is to make it open source as soon as possible. There's also open protocols, like the Portable Communities protocol and we can claim that as an open protocol. So I think it's still a little vague, but I think we can massage it.
I want to get to the document. What the heck is it called? Pose.
I'll share it here.
That's that.
Yeah, so we made this change.
Can you put the link?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. And I've been actually spending more time in the where it says draft exec summary. That's actually where I've been kind of spending more time. So you can click on the draft exec summary section, you go down there.
Oh yeah. Yeah, we yeah, go ahead.
Well, and so I mean, I guess one of the things I would love to do is kind of just go through the story broadly again and see if we're kind of on board with that same story. And then the other thing really is, I guess, just another sanity test around whether this whole process makes sense, because the probabilities are pretty small. And just kind of, I was interacting a little bit with Nisha around NSF grants, and she's still pushing back on, this isn't a good match.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, but, I mean, there's no point in wasting time if she thinks that. What is she basing
I mean,
that
I actually think there might be something to us getting our story together, and that's a useful thing anyway. She's suggesting that it might make a better SBIR, which I can imagine is also true. Makes it more of a business kind of orientation, I think. But I kind of feel like still we could do this and then that, so I'm not sure that they're mutually exclusive. And it's a little bit of like, how committed are this to you are, like I think Brad, you're pretty much into this. I'm pretty much into this. Michelle, I feel like we're maybe dragging you into this. I don't want to do that.
Well, if it goes to the point of, I mean, I'm not dragged in, but I am interested, of course, I'm interested in the whole thing. I see the value of the thing, and I am interested in the governance of the whole thing, and how we design that, and how we co-design that, and how we offer this social governance commons to that network, right? As
Right.
both as the internal workings and as ways of helping those networks be successful. So
Agreed.
I'm good. I'm here.
Okay. Well, so then one of the questions will be, I think we basically need a PI. Someone needs to hold this contract. It turns out that ISI can take the NSF grant. The PAMS group will do that. And so GRC could be, I guess, it still needs an individual. And so I guess if it's GRC, that individual's me. I mean, GRC doesn't really have employees. I mean, I guess I'm an employee. But you need to be a full-time employee based in the United States for an American organization to hold the contract.
That has
Okay.
an organization that has governance.
Well, it's just
yeah.
I mean, go ahead.
A legit. Well, yeah, I mean, if the full-time employee issue, I mean, I don't. If you think you can finesse that, that would be one thing. But if that's really required, and well, I'll let you decide, Dave, whether you feel like that you can finesse that.
I mean, Brad, in many ways, you're the most logical PI probably because you're more central to this. And it does occur to me that you had talked about maybe switch it. You were flexible to switch your fiscal sponsorship. If your current fiscal sponsor was willing to do an NSF grant, that might work. Or you just switch over to ISI, and then ISI holds the grant, right?
Yeah.
And they have already gotten one NSF grant, so there's that. They've kind of got the track record of one. And so that would be a fairly you just become a project of ISI, and then we apply through ISI with you as the PI, as an employee, and you're an employee of ISI, right? You're even, right? Because the way the fiscal sponsorship stuff works.
Okay, yeah, and I could have a salary of $1 if she wants.
I guess so, right? I mean, there's I mean, there's a whole question around we have to put together a budget, but I assume most of the budget goes to kind of convening facilitation-y stuff.
Right.
Actually getting people to meetings or whatever, and organizing meetings and things, which I think would be really interesting to be able to actually invest in some facilitation. So,
well, I'll tell you what, I'll volunteer to make the next draft, Dave, because I think I have a pretty complete idea about what now after reviewing it with you. The blanks that need to be filled. And I think I can do it the fastest because I've got a lot of writing already. So I'll go ahead. I'll volunteer to do that in the next 2 days. And then we can then let's look at it and see. And then maybe what is it, Nisha?
Nisha.
Okay. And then let's give it to her and say, what do you think now? Because I really do believe that we can tell the story I think it's actually a strong story. Whether it fits that particular, their particular goal, I don't know. I mean, the SBIR thing is really, I don't see it as a small business. I mean, unless you consider a cooperative a small, I guess you could call a cooperative a small business.
I think you could.
So yeah, I mean, let's do both. But yeah, so give me a day and a half of to kind of make a new rev of it, and then we can review maybe Friday morning or something.
Okay. Well, if it's okay to dual track, there was two things I was thinking. One, I would love to do like a couple of paragraphs. And
why don't you go ahead?
And do you follow at all Pete Kaminsky's the Plex? Do you get that?
Not enough. I haven't seen it recently.
Anyway, I was going to submit it to the Plex, asking people for critique. I figured that would be a good group of folks to talk about how to explain this stuff and whether it matters and stuff like that. And I thought they'd be a good test bed. And we probably need to do it now because we're just going to run out of time otherwise.
Well, if you could do your version, I'm not going to get to it for a while anyway. So if you want to do any changes between today, then I'll do my part tomorrow.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll play with it some more today. And then then the other thing I just wanted to check with you guys and see. So I'm kind of coming back to trying to frame it in the NSFE way, but also like, all of my stuff goes back to how we built the internet kind of. So that's my metaphor. And I'm saying that what we're talking about here with the social, so I changed the title of the executive summary there a little bit to be,
Oh, I saw that.
Sustaining an
Yeah,
open
that's good.
source social graph ecosystem. And so
Yeah.
I'm trying to use the NSF wording, but I actually think that that might be kind of the right description. And
Yeah.
I'm equating the social graph essentially with DNS.
Okay.
Instead of us linking computers and creating the infrastructure to link computers, we're linking people.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's the
Yeah.
layer that we want the ecosystem to support.
Right.
And then the
That's
argument
good.
is that you'll get kind of like the energy that came out of connecting computers on the internet, we're going to get similar energy out of connecting people kind of around the globe.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good.
And
Yeah.
then and this is another assumption here, I was thinking that we would use bioregions as our primary use case. That the point is that we're going to see a evolution in governance at the bioregional level, and it requires this kind of a social graph.
Great. So if you'll get that started, I can then riff on that.
Okay. Michelle, does that make sense to you? Are you?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, good. If you guys are comfortable with that, I don't know.
It makes sense to me because like when you say it, I'm like, yes, that's what we need. Like,
okay. That seems to be the test, right?
For governance across the bioregion and for bioregions to connect and collaborate and develop strategies and
It's a self-organizing. It just allows self-organizing in a new way. And there's a difference between the commercial social graphs, which are captured. They're like the old days where people had their own internal networks, but now we need the networks to connect. So
that's really good. Yeah, I mean, yeah. If we do this right, I mean, it totally fits into the DWeb vision, and we could even get Brewster involved if when the languaging is good enough. So Brewster Kale.
It would be interesting, and I don't know the space enough, Brad. Are there people? It feels like there ought to be a bunch of people doing shit like this. I know that from the ChatGPT stuff, there's certainly stuff about, kind of individual authorization. I think we want to be able to say, here's the projects going on in this space, some of which are going to be leveraged. And that's the reason we're doing ecosystem development, right? Is that we're reaching out to these kinds of projects.
Right. Yeah. Well,
if there's somebody doing this thing, we want to be able to point at it. We don't want them to.
I also still owe you or owe us an update of the tech stack. But if you remember, and it's in the doc now, I think, didn't I add it as the existing one? But if you remember, there's basically proof of humanity, which is self-sovereign identity, right? Then it's people marking, which is I own my opinions of other people, right? And I decide when those edges get shared, what edges of mine get shared and what subgraphs. And then you have the graph layer, which is communities of people sharing their graphs and composing and federating. And then you have the application layer. And so I think yes, there's Internet Identity Workshop working at the bottom layer. There's tons of people doing, self-sovereign identity, and I'm directly involved with Kalia and Drummond Reed and others, and there's tons of allies in there. The people marking, the self-sovereign, content layer, let's say the people marking, is all about agent centricity and crypto key-based control over my edges, right? And so there's allies there. And then you have at the community layer, you have things like Noster, which I don't know if you've Noster is a good example. Holochain also, where all these pieces. So anyway, I'll do an updated one, but I think that yes,
because I think there's
a lot of allies out.
We basically got a 15-page research paper to write over the next week.
Okay.
And I think one of them is going to be an analysis of the existing ecosystem that we are convening.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then we'll
Okay.
probably need, I think, I don't know, I got to check with Nisha. There's like I think there's like a letter of testimonial kind of function where people will, you know, like we need Kalia to send us an email that says, I support this project and I'll be involved or something like that.
Right. Yeah. I think that's the, if you go to DWeb, there's DWeb Camp, but there's also the DWeb.
I'm just gonna, I want to go to the Gathering of the Tribes thing and hear about that.
Oh yeah. Yeah, me too. Okay.
And also I'm gonna be away from email and stuff Thursday, Friday, but I'll be back
Okay.
on Monday. So
Okay.
if
Yeah, I wanted to
tell me
get to
the
that too.
gaps I
So,
can fill in, me and Tracy and I will
yeah.
fill them
All right.
in.
So Dave and I will make progress on this, and then we'll have a new rev, late tomorrow.
Okay.
Great. All right. I
Okay.
think I
Thanks,
will
guys.
join that too. Thanks, guys.